This is how the front lines would look like in this alternate Second World War. This video is the finale of the Project Kaisertum Series, which started in 1914, with Germany winning the Great War by capturing Paris. In red you will see the Axis of Revenge, and in blue you will see the German Sphere, fighting for world domination. The Axis of Revenge want to destroy the German hegemony over the continent, while the Germans want to maintain their positions as the masters of Europe. In the last episodes, two shocking things happened. The first was that the Italians invaded the Salonika Pact, and the other was that Germany developed a micronuclear weapon, which, although unrealistic, is a bomb that weighs only 0.1% of the historical one dropped on Japan, so only 4.4 kilograms. This bomb was able to destroy a French super heavy tank more effectively, due to its high blast radius. This would be an effective counter against the weapon that France relies on to win the war. At this point, any side is possible to win the conflict, and I plan to do a bonus episode on the losing side of this episode winning the war. I asked you which side do you think would win, and 76% of you thought that the German Sphere would win, while the rest 24% believed that the Axis of Revenge had the advantage. Let me show you what I came up with. First up, I want to mention the Mediterranean situation, where the British cannot use the Suez Canal, as without Malta and Gibraltar, it would be too dangerous for the British ships to pass through. Then this would mean that for Britain to supply and be supplied from their colonies would need to go all around Africa, which is more costly. I want to tell you that the French and the Italian navies combined can rival the British on its own, so I think it's possible for these countries to try to starve Britain by blockading the home islands, or at least controlling the English Channel. The thing is that Britain is allied with Germany, so with their navies combined I don't think that it's too possible. The Americans, however, would still freely trade with the British, but this would all change with the civilian ship being accidentally destroyed by the French submarines. This will not bring the Americans into the war, but would anger its population. Land-lease from the Americans could soon be secretly sent to Britain and Germany, as the Americans and the American public are firmly on their side. As for Europe, I would have Finland sign a separate peace treaty and leave the war, mostly due to internal pressure. This is because Finland would be a kingdom led by a German king, which the people of Finland would like to change. There is going to be a revolution that would oust the king from power, turn Finland into a republic and sign a peace treaty with the Russians. While all I just mentioned is good news for the Axis of Revenge, I am yet to mention Germany and their atomic experiment, which was successful on the battlefield. The French were surprised by it, but they didn't care too much, as the prototype only destroyed 4 super heavy tanks, with there being around 1000 more in stockpile. The French are also yet to attack the Netherlands, and the French High Command believe that since the super heavy tanks are strong in urban combat, they would have an easy time taking off the Dutch major cities. Then they would simply march into the Rhineland and take the German industry and population, forcing a ceasefire. These were the hopes of France, and understandably, they were thinking that not all yet is lost. Additionally, the Germans only dropped one of these atomic bombs on the front lines, so the French didn't know if there is more to come, and how many of these bombs Germany could produce. To the ultranationalists and their propaganda, they would say that this was a one-time occurrence, and that there is no way for Germany could do it again. This is why the French armored divisions would arrive in the south of the Netherlands and try to take the city of Breda. The Germans, together with the British army, would reinforce the city and await for the French advances. As this would be happening around the summer of 1933, there is already a year and a half since the war started, but progress is extremely slow for both sides. France would enter the city with super heavy tanks, but this time the mindset of the Germans would be different. Before the discovery of the atomic bomb, the Germans were focusing on trying to destroy the super heavy tanks, but now they would have a reliable way to do so they can focus on something else. Germany still has the air advantage, so this gives them great visibility and the ability to bomb enemy positions. I think that the Germans and the Brits could also try to cut the French supply off, rather than to fight them directly, which would be more difficult and costly. The occupied Belgians would be instructed to rebel against the French, making the encirclement possible. For France, this means that resupplying these fuel-consuming machines is close to impossible, so they would have to face a difficult choice. One option is to try to break free from the encirclement and retreat, but there is a big problem with that. The thing is that the super heavy tanks would have to retreat to the Dutch flatlands, and considering that the weather is clear, the German and British Air Force could easily bomb the tanks and destroy hundreds of them. This is why the French High Command would do the second option, which is to fight and win decisively. They would hope that another army would help them break free, so this is a high risk and high reward situation. The super heavy tanks would enter the city of Breda, but as I said earlier, Germany and Britain would be prepared, as they would put concrete blocks and defenses on the roads, slowing down any French advancements. This would mean that the more time the French lose in capturing the city, the higher chance the super heavy tanks have to run out of fuel and become useless on the battlefield. This means that France would need to have a quick victory or lose everything, as due to the Belgian rebellions, their reinforcements are considerably slowed down. I think it's entirely possible for Germany to also surprise the French and use their atomic weapons on the tanks, destroying many of them in the process. The goal for the Germans would be to destroy just a few of these tanks, but this would instill panic in the French divisions and would make them disoriented or make them surrender. As I said, this atomic bomb is literally 1000 times smaller and weaker than the one dropped on Japan. Right now, fighting is happening in the city of Breda, and with 15 kilotons, which is the historical bomb dropped on Japan, it would wipe out the entire city of Breda, as you can see from this simulation. The thing is that since this bomb is literally 1000 times smaller and weaker, this would actually look like this. We will ignore the green radius, as this is radiation, the long-term effects of which are still mostly unknown at the time. You can clearly see that the German atomic weapon can destroy a whole street, and they can expect to take down a few French super heavy tanks with it. You can see just how small in terms of scope this weapon really is, hence why I believe it could be used in this alternate Second World War. Not so long after that, the French divisions would be forced to surrender or risk being annihilated. They would be deep into enemy territory, and without any backup and nuclear weapons being used upon them, there would be no hope for the French divisions trapped in Breda. The Germans successfully trapped the French, and this would be a heavy morale boost for the Germans' fear, as for the first 1.5 years of the war they were suffering only losses. Additionally, this battle can be seen as a decisive one that would turn the tides of the war. Now for the Eastern Front. I already mentioned that Finland would drop out of the war, so you may assume that Russia would perform better, but I don't think this would be the case. This is all because of Hungary, who I would say are the soft underbelly of the Axis of Revenge. This is because only about 60% of the people in Hungary are ethnic Hungarians, so the remaining 40% will cause a lot of trouble. This is especially seen with the Slovaks and the Romanians. Due to geographical proximity, the Slovaks will be soon liberated by German and Polish troops, causing a great blow to the Hungarians. Russia is still nowhere close to help Hungary out, but the Italians would border them. The thing is that Italy is not too interested in helping the Hungarians out, as Italy is not a member of the Axis of Revenge, but they would cooperate with them. The Italians want to reach their own goal of subjugating the Balkans, and once that is done, they can leave the war, so they will focus on achieving this first. Hungary is practically encircled, as I don't see the Italians helping them out for the reason I just outlined. Italy and the Axis of Revenge don't like each other, as France is claiming Italian lands, which the Italians took after their victory in the Great War. This alliance between Italy and the Axis of Revenge is one of convenience, and because they share the same enemies. Also, the Axis of Revenge and Italy are ideologically different, but are working together for a shared goal, which is to topple German hegemony. This is like the United Kingdom and the United States of America working with the Soviet Union historically. They did that because of the greater enemy, which was Germany, and after the Germans were defeated, there was a cold war between the two sides. This is why Hungary will start losing land, and their advances in Transylvania would stall due to Romanian rebellions, but also because they lost almost all of Slovakia. Considering this situation, I think it's fair to say that Germany would soon recapture Vienna and enter Hungarian Burgenland, mainly inhabited by German speakers. Poland and Ukraine would also be very committed to their German allies, as in the case of victory, Poland would be promised all of Belarus and an opportunity to include Lithuania if it's desired by both parties. As for Ukraine, they would triple their territory in a case of a German victory, so this is serving as a morale boost for both of these countries. Ukraine and Poland were also invaded by the Russians, so the people are determined to fight, but there is also another perspective to consider, not just the territorial gains. Ukraine and Poland were part of the former Russian Empire, where they were oppressed and underdeveloped on purpose by the Russians. For the Ukrainians and Poles, the war is one of survival, not just one of expansion. There is a lot for them to gain, but also a lot to lose, so they would fight hard and be really committed to the war effort. This is why I would think that they would start pushing the Russians out of the Baltics, Poland and Ukraine, but Russia would still hold their ground around the city of Kiev. Seeing this weakness, the Turkish Sultanate, which is allied with Germany and Persia, would enter the war, with the goal to reclaim some of their lost territories. As to mention Persia, they would have an easy time to capture Russian Armenia, but pushing beyond the Caucasus Mountains would be practically impossible. Persia would focus on Central Asia, with the goal to liberate and integrate these Muslim people into their empire. In the region, there was a Muslim rebellion in 1921, so these people may just rise up again with the goal of securing their own state. As for the Balkans, Italy would have a big advantage, as I see them taking most of Macedonia, maybe even the city of Thessaloniki, also known as Salonika, where the Salonika Pact was signed. This would be a big blow for morale for all its members, but also it would cut Greece away from Bulgaria, isolating the two countries. Germany also has more important things to deal with, rather than to save the Balkans, so they would be left upon their own fate. Now, historically, in the Second World War, the Italians failed to take the Greeks on their own, but I believe the situation is quite different. Firstly, because historically, Italy had to fight only through Albania and go into fortified Greek positions. Now, this is not the case, as they would have Illyria, which is committed to unite the South Slavs under them. This opens up another front where Italy can expand their influence and conquer the Balkans. The situation is looking dire for my home country of Bulgaria. As for the Far East, Japan would take out Qingdao and the German Pacific easily, but they would have trouble taking Hong Kong and the British dominions in the region. Taiwan is in a position where they can aid Japan, opening a front for India and British Malaya, but this goes the other way around. In this timeline, I have decided that France would get to keep French Indochina, which is perhaps not too realistic. But this is how I decided to do it in the first episode, and I want to stick with that. Basically, the British can sway Taiwan on their side by promising them most of French Indochina in exchange for an alliance, which I think would be taken by Taiwan, with most of French Indochina soon falling. This would secure the British possessions in the Far East. Around the same time, the Americans are going to sign the Home Defense Act or the Lend-Lease Act, where they would officially help the British and the Germans, as they see Japan as a threat to their Philippine holdings, but they also see the axis of revenge as a threat to democracy. This is because although Germany is a monarchy, they are a constitutional one, with functional elections. Same can be said for the British, so the Americans can realistically support only one side, the one defending liberty. As I said, the front in the Balkans would look dire, as the Salonika Pact can be overrun if nothing is done. Germany cannot commit soldiers there, but they would have to keep them alive. This can lead to the Turkish Sultanate also falling. Most importantly, if the Salonika Pact doesn't capitulate to Italy, the Germans can use them to send troops over to Persia and Turkey, which are two separate fronts against the Russians. This means not having to fight on just one front. The Germans can see how the Russians cannot sustain fighting on three fronts, so they will try to alleviate pressure from the Salonika Pact. This can be done by cutting off Italy from Illyria. Realistically, Germany cannot fight in the Alps, but Istria is a flat terrain, where Germany can use their tanks and especially air advantage to successfully cut the Italians away from Illyria. Italy already controls the Adriatic Sea, so this wouldn't be a big blow for them, but now their supply has to travel through sea. This is a big problem, as I said earlier that Germany has a big air advantage over its enemies. This is because France never got around to producing a lot of airplanes, while Russia was barely keeping it together politically, and they had to suppress many rebellions. Hungary just became a free nation, so really Germany could overpower Italy alone in terms of air. Since the Italians are now having to use convoys for supplying their Balkan campaign, the Germans can drop their nuclear bombs on top of one, and if it connects successfully, it can destroy all the ships around it. Now I know that anti-air exists and such operation require absolute air superiority. I'm not saying that this would happen, but it's more likely than ever. Please remember that this is not realistic. Moving west to France, the country officially became an ultranational state in 1930, and just 2 years after that, they invaded the Germans out of fear that this was their only chance, as the Germans would soon outscale them in the future. The French people would obviously not be happy about the regime change, as the ultranationalists barely won over the communists. The French secret police tried to get rid of most communist sympathizers, but this just pushed them into hiding and antagonized them further. In 1934, while the war is still ongoing, Joseph Darnaud would be assassinated by a pro-communist group, whose goal is to end the war. This would happen as Joseph Darnaud would be giving a speech to his generals, and a bomb planted in a suitcase would go off in the room, killing him and injuring 20 people. This is a big blow to France politically, but it doesn't change the situation on the front lines, which as of right now is favorable for the French. This means that France is becoming more and more unstable, and they have to suppress their people further, which would use vital war resources and manpower. Cracks are starting to show in the dictatorial regime. The army commanders also do not sympathize with the ruling ideology, but are serving their beloved country. The problem is that the communists wanted to put Charles de Gaulle in charge, as they believed that he would either end the war or win it easily. I say this is a problem because the French ultranationalists would suspect that because he was put as the successor of Joseph Darnaud, that Charles de Gaulle must be involved in the killing of the French supreme leader. This is why not so long after that, Charles de Gaulle would be confronted and choose to die as a national hero, as he would claim his own life. France would lose the head of its ultranationalist revolution and perhaps their best army general, who was leading the super heavy tanks into battle and winning almost in all fronts. When news of this would reach the Germans, they would drop pamphlets onto the French people, where they would tell them the peace conditions. Germany will not take any French lands or seek war reparations. Even more, the Germans would help them install a functional democracy in France and get rid of the tyrannical dictatorship. Due to the lack of resources for the French, we can assume that under this ultranationalist France, that the Frenchmen would have a similar life to the historical German-occupied France, or at least Vichy France. Germany will also take advantage of the news and go into Belgium, with the hope to reach the pockets of Belgian resistance and to help them, liberating the country in the process. Considering the situation, I would say that exactly this would happen. The Germans would also find more effective ways to destroy the French super heavy tanks, not just with nuclear weapons, but with regular bombs that are dropped more accurately, due to better technology and pilot training. France is really screwed, and the German and the British will focus on destroying the French first, as this would perhaps make Italy drop out of the war, and then the German sphere can focus on taking down Russia, Hungary and Japan. Speaking of Hungary, considering that they have to fight a war on almost all fronts, but also to suppress the Slovaks, Romanians and the South Slavs, while also being semi-encircled, as Italy would not aid them too much, I would say that Hungary will sooner or later collapse. At that point, the Hungarians have been at war for almost 4 years, as they took part in the collapse of Austria-Hungary and Illyria, fighting against Austria and Illyria, and then with the Romanians and the Salonika Pact. And now they're fighting exactly the same enemies, excluding Illyria, but also the entirety of the German sphere. This is why I would say that it's inevitable for Hungary to collapse under these circumstances. This would alleviate a lot of pressure from the Salonika Pact, and with German aid in cutting the Italians from the peninsula, the Bulgarians can reclaim Macedonia and to link up with the Greeks. The French are going to be inevitably invaded from Belgium, which was just fully retaken by the Germans, who are ready to take revenge in France. There will be a major tank battle around the city of Amiens, but considering the German tank, air and nuclear advantage, as well as Charles de Gaulle not being alive to lead his troops, it should result in a decisive German victory, opening up the way to capture Paris. At that point, the communists would try to trigger a civil war in France and occupy much of the south, with Germany occupying the north. With France out of the war, the Italians would also sue for peace, as they would be next on the chopping block, without any clear chance of victory considering the situation. This would also bring peace upon the Balkans. Russia and Japan are the only countries left in the war, and they cannot turn the tides of the war on their own. But out of sheer insanity by their ruling high command, the war would drag on and take the lives of millions more people. We can expect that to fully pacify Russia and Japan, it can take 1 or 2 years of extra combat, but the war is practically won by the German sphere and the United Kingdom. The war would take the lives of around 50 million people, which is less than the Second World War in our timeline. But this is because I didn't account for Japan invading China in this scenario, which may be possible, but I neglected Asia on purpose, as I didn't know what could happen there. Anyways, let me show you the peace treaty in Europe. Germany would keep their promise to not punish the French, but would install a functioning monarchy. The communists in France, which enjoyed a lot of support, would merge with some democratic parties to form the Social Democratic Party of France, having the same ideology as Germany and Britain. The British would take most of the French colonies in Africa and the Pacific, with India seizing the French India territory. The Netherlands would annex the French Caribbean as compensation. Italy would lose Savoy and Nice to France, and their personal union with Illyria would be broken. Germany would take this time to fully integrate Austria-Bohemia into the empire, but also Burgenland from Hungary and South Tyrol from Italy, including the Istrian Peninsula, which used to be part of the Austrian Empire. Britain would take Malta, but also all of the Italian colonies. Bulgaria would occupy Illyria, with the goal to unite all the South Slavs, but considering the situation, it will be not too possible, even if Bulgaria adds a separate crown. The Balkans would see the need to stand united, so a Balkan Federation is possible, where the kings would continue to rule over their countries, but have a shared army and foreign policy, sort of like the German Empire and even the Holy Roman Empire, being sort of decentralized. This alliance would include Illyria, but Romania is unlikely to join for the time being, so all of the Balkans would be united under one. As for Romania, they would get their claimed territories of Hungary, which is Transylvania. Hungary would also lose Slovakia and the South Slavic lands, leaving them only with their core territory. Ukraine and Poland would also expand into their claimed territories at the expense of Russia, with Finland either gaining Karelia and the Kola Peninsula or there being created a separate Karelian nation. The Turkish Sultanate would also reclaim all of their lost lands, with Georgia and Armenia getting their full independence, Persia taking Dagestan and Chechnya, but also all of Turkmenistan, with the rest becoming known as the Central Asian Federation. As for the Japanese, Britain would take all of their islands and liberate Korea. Germany would focus on rebuilding France and Italy, preferring to have them as allies rather than enemies. Additionally, there can be a cold war between the German sphere and the English-speaking sphere, which is the British Commonwealth and the United States of America, so this can be the unifying force needed to make peace in Europe. Around the same time, Germany would fully perfect their nuclear technology and in 1940 would have a successful test of an atomic bomb in Namibia that can wipe out an entire city. Use of this would spread around the world and soon all of the major powers would have such a technology of their own. This would result in mutually assured destruction on all sides. I don't think that the borders in Europe would fluctuate too much, but there is also no decolonization, so the entire world is completely unrecognizable. I think that with the possession of the atomic bomb, Germany would keep their gains and hegemony over Europe, so we can expect that these borders would last us up until the modern day, unless the Balkan Federation collapses. If this video gains 3000 likes, I will do a bonus episode where the Axis of Revenge would win this war instead of the German sphere. So make sure to like and subscribe if you don't want to miss it out. Thank you for watching and I wish you the best day possible. Goodbye.